Welcome to the Empathy Stories channel, where every story is a reminder of the power of kindness, compassion, and the connections that change lives. Today, we bring you a heartfelt journey of a young man whose simple act of kindness on a bus transforms not only his life, but the lives of those around him. Grab a seat and let this inspiring tale remind you of the incredible impact of empathy and generosity. Samuel Harris was a man defined by his circumstances. At 27, he had never known anything other than struggle. His small apartment, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, was a mirror of his life, simple, faded, and filled with remnants of days spent working tirelessly for the smallest taste of stability. The morning light crept through the tattered blinds, casting faint shadows across the room. The shrill sound of the alarm sliced through the stillness, rousing Samuel from his restless slumber. He slapped the snooze button instinctively, but there was no time to linger. Not today, not any day. Samuel had learned early on that life demanded everything. Every minute was accounted for in his world. And time, he often thought, was the one thing he could never afford to waste. His bed, though firm and worn, had been his refuge for the past few years, the only comfort in a life that offered little else. The room was sparse, just a couch that had seen better days, a coffee table battered by time, and a small kitchen with dated appliances that hummed quietly in the background. There was no room for luxuries in Samuel's life, but there was always room for work. By day, he was a machine operator at an old factory, a place where the hum of industrial machines was the soundtrack to his existence. The hours were long, the work grueling, and the pay barely enough to cover his bills. But Samuel never complained. He didn't have the luxury of complaining. His mother, Grace, lived hundreds of miles away in a small town, fighting an unrelenting battle with leukemia. The treatments were expensive, and every penny Samuel earned went toward her medical bills. He knew she was suffering, and though he couldn't be there every moment, he made sure she felt his presence in every way he could. At night, he took on a second job, cleaning the very factory where he worked. It was exhausting, but the extra income was vital. His younger sister, Emily, had given up her dreams of going to college to care for their mother. It weighed heavily on Samuel's heart, knowing that his sister had sacrificed so much for their family. Emily, always the selfless one, had put her own life on hold, and Samuel had promised her that he would make things better. He just didn't know how or when. He sat on the edge of his bed that morning, his thoughts consumed by these burdens, his family, the bills, the weight of responsibility. Life felt like an endless cycle of work and worry. But through it all, Samuel had an unwavering belief that somehow things would get better. He wasn't sure how or when, but he knew that one day, this grind would end. There had to be more than this, more than the factory, more than the long shifts, more than the constant fear of falling short. As he prepared for another day, wrapping his threadbare jacket tightly around his shoulders against the chill of the autumn morning, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Life had a way of surprising you, even when you least expected it. He didn't know it yet. But today, everything was about to shift. Samuel stood at the bus stop, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his worn jacket, trying to keep warm in the crisp autumn air. The streets were quiet, the world still groggy from the early morning fog that had settled over the city. A distant car hummed past, its engine the only sound breaking the silence. Samuel shivered, rubbing his hands together as he clutched the sandwich he'd made for breakfast, a humble peanut butter creation wrapped in a flimsy napkin. It was the only meal he could afford before the long shift ahead, a routine he had grown accustomed to. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes, and Samuel climbed aboard, his eyes scanning the usual crowd of weary commuters. Factory workers, nurses, and other blue-collar folks were scattered throughout the bus, their tired faces reflecting the shared burden of the daily grind. There was an unspoken camaraderie among them, a quiet nod, a brief acknowledgement of the struggles they all faced. Samuel slid into his usual seat by the window, the glass fogging slightly as he rested his head against it, staring out at the city that seemed to pass him by. The bus jolted forward, picking up speed as it made its way through the heart of the city. Samuel's mind wandered, as it often did during these morning commutes. His thoughts turned to his family, his mother's battle with cancer, the mounting medical bills, and his sister Emily, who had sacrificed so much to care for their mother. Samuel's life had become a blur of factory machines, cleaning supplies, and endless hours of work. There was no time for dreams, no time for rest. But even so, he held on to the hope that something would change, that one day he would be able to offer his family more than just survival. It was then that he noticed her. An elderly woman had boarded the bus, her steps slow and measured, as though each movement took a great deal of effort. She gripped a cane in one hand, her other hand clutching a small handbag. Her frail frame swayed slightly with the motion of the bus, and Samuel could see the strain on her face. It was clear she was struggling, but no one else seemed to notice. Every seat on the bus was taken, and the elderly woman scanned the rows for a place to sit. The bus lurched forward again, and Samuel could see her grip the overhead rail, her knuckles turning white with the effort. Something stirred within him. Without thinking, he stood up, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the bus. "Ma'am, please take my seat," he said, his tone firm but gentle. The woman looked at him in surprise, her tired eyes softening as she studied his face. A faint smile crept onto her lips, and her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Thank you, young man. That's very kind of you." Samuel helped her settle into the seat, making sure she was comfortable before stepping back. He didn't think much of it. Kindness was something he did without a second thought. It was simply who he was. But as he retreated to the back of the bus, a sudden tap on his shoulder made him turn. The elderly woman was standing before him again, her frail form swaying with the motion of the bus. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice gentle but insistent. "I wanted to give you this." Samuel watched, puzzled, as she handed him a small, folded piece of paper. He took it from her, unsure of what to make of the gesture. Before he could say anything, the woman turned and shuffled back to her seat, her eyes closing as if she were already lost in her own thoughts. Samuel unfolded the note, his eyes scanning the neatly written words, 12 Garden Grove Lane, and a strange code, 42819. His brow furrowed in confusion. Who was this woman? Why had she given him this address? What was the meaning of the code? He glanced back toward her, but she was already settled into her seat, her eyes closed. There were no more answers from her, only the quiet hum of the bus as it continued its journey. Samuel slipped the note into his pocket, deciding that he would figure it out later. But in the back of his mind, curiosity gnawed at him. Why had she chosen him? What was the story behind the note? The rest of the ride passed in a blur, but the note lingered in his thoughts. Over the next few days, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that the woman's gesture meant something more than just a random act of kindness. Something told him that this small, seemingly insignificant moment was the beginning of something larger, something that would change the course of his life. And so, on his next day off, he decided to follow the note. He would find out what it meant, even if it led him to a place he could never have imagined. Samuel had never been one to follow strange leads. His life had always been one of practicality, of doing what was necessary to survive, to make ends meet. But something about the note gnawed at him, its cryptic message pulling at his curiosity with a strength he couldn't explain. As he stood at the bus stop the following morning, staring at the cold, gray sky, he made up his mind. He would follow the note. It wasn't that Samuel expected anything extraordinary to come of it. He was simply seeking answers, the kind of closure that would ease the swirling thoughts in his mind. Perhaps the woman had simply misplaced the note, or maybe she had meant it for someone else. But something deep within him told him that this was no accident, that the note, with its strange address and code, was meant for him. The day was dull, the city streets devoid of the usual rush. As Samuel boarded the bus and made his way across town, as the bus rattled down the familiar streets, Samuel's mind was heavy with questions. He kept turning the address over in his mind. 12 Garden Grove Lane. It sounded so ordinary, so unremarkable. But the mansion he had envisioned on that street was anything but ordinary. When he arrived at the intersection where the street began, he stepped off the bus, feeling the slight weight of apprehension in his chest. He followed the address on the note, walking through blocks of houses that grew more and more imposing with each step. The streets became quieter, the houses grander, the lawns meticulously manicured as though plucked from a postcard. He could almost feel the difference in the air, the tension between his world and theirs. At last, he arrived at the gates of 12 Garden Grove Lane. The sprawling mansion loomed before him, its stone facade gleaming in the late afternoon light. Samuel hesitated. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood there, feeling both excited and out of place. He glanced around, searching for some sign that he was in the right place. There was none, just the grand iron gates and the meticulously trimmed hedges, each one more pristine than anything Samuel had ever encountered. He stared at the keypad by the gate, then down at the note in his hand. 42819. He entered the number slowly, hesitantly, as if expecting something to go wrong. But when he pressed the final digit, the gate clicked open with an almost eerie ease. A wave of nervous excitement rushed over him as he stepped onto the property. The driveway was long and winding, flanked by towering trees and lush greenery. Every step he took seemed to pull him deeper into a world he had never known, one of wealth, privilege, and unfamiliarity. His shoes crunched softly against the gravel, and he forced himself to take slow, steady breaths, trying to calm the fluttering in his chest. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he had already come this far. The mansion grew larger the closer he got, its windows reflecting the late afternoon sun, its stone pillars exuding old-world grandeur. He felt an odd sense of awe, as though he were approaching a dream, one he could never have imagined for himself. He reached the front door, which was slightly ajar, as if someone had been expecting him. Samuel knocked gently, unsure of how he should approach this. The door creaked open, revealing a grand interior bathed in soft light. Marble floors stretched out beneath him, and crystal chandeliers sparkled from above, casting delicate shadows on the polished surfaces. The space was immaculate, but it was also quiet, a stillness that felt almost sacred. Then, he heard a voice, soft and welcoming, yet filled with the kind of authority that only comes with age and experience. "Welcome, Samuel," the voice said. He turned, startled, and there she was, the elderly woman from the bus, Eleanor Bradford. She looked different now, no longer the frail figure clutching a cane, but a woman standing tall, her presence commanding and dignified. She wore a simple yet elegant dress that made her seem even more regal, her eyes warm with recognition and something else, something deep and knowing. "I've been expecting you," she continued, her smile gentle but knowing. Samuel stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what was happening. How did she know his name? Why had she invited him here? But before he could speak, Eleanor stepped forward, taking his hand with surprising strength for someone her age. She guided him into the house, and Samuel followed, unsure but compelled by her calm, reassuring demeanor. She led him into a spacious sitting room, where the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. They sat together, and Eleanor poured them both a cup of tea, her hand steady despite the frailty that remained in her form. Samuel, still in a daze, accepted the cup, his fingers trembling slightly as he took a sip. "I'm sure you're wondering why you're here," she said, settling into her chair. "The truth is, I was touched by your act of kindness on the bus. You see, in this world, it's rare to find someone who will step out of their way to help another, especially without expecting anything in return. And that, Samuel, is something I deeply admire." Samuel listened, his confusion slowly giving way to something else, a strange mixture of humility and awe. He had never thought much of his own kindness. It was simply the way he was. But hearing Eleanor speak of it like this made him realize just how rare such acts had become in a world so focused on survival. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "I've lived a long life, Samuel," she continued. "I have seen both success and loss, triumph and heartbreak. But in my later years, I have come to realize that the greatest gift one can give is trust. trust in others, and in the goodness of the human heart. That is why I brought you here today." Samuel blinked, unsure where this conversation was leading. He had always lived with a certain skepticism about the world. People didn't just offer opportunities like this. There was always a catch, always a reason behind every gesture. But as he met Eleanor's gaze, he could see that there was no trick here, no hidden agenda. And then, with a calm that seemed to fill the room, Eleanor made her offer. "Samuel, I would like to offer you a position as my caretaker. It comes with a salary far beyond anything you could imagine, accommodations in this house, and access to any resources you may need. But more than that, it is an opportunity for you to be part of something meaningful, a chance to help someone in need, as you have already done so selflessly for others." Samuel's breath caught in his throat. This was beyond anything he could have hoped for, beyond any dream he had ever dared to imagine. A job offer like this was something that could change everything. But still, doubts lingered. Why him? What did she see in him that made him worthy of such an opportunity? Eleanor smiled, as if reading his thoughts. "Because, Samuel, you have already shown me who you are. Sometimes, it takes just one act of kindness to reveal the true nature of a person. And in you, I see someone who has integrity, compassion, and the heart to do good." The room was silent for a moment, as Samuel processed her words. Could he really accept this? Could he step into a life that was so different from the one he had known? The answer, though uncertain, was clear. This was the chance he had been waiting for. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with approval. "I knew you would." The transition wasn't easy. Samuel had worked hard for everything he had. And now, here he was, standing in a world far removed from anything he had ever known. The mansion, with its marble floors and grand chandeliers, felt like something out of a dream, a place he had only seen in movies. But now, it was his reality. For the first few days, Samuel moved like a fish out of water, unsure of his place in this unfamiliar world. Eleanor's world was one of quiet luxury, of routines that had been perfected over years of living in such grandeur. Yet, despite the overwhelming beauty of it all, there was a stillness in the house, a quiet solitude that Samuel found both comforting and unnerving. The grandness of the mansion seemed to echo with the weight of Eleanor's years, the soft whispers of memories that hung in the air like a delicate mist. Eleanor had already planned out his duties with a precision that made Samuel's head spin. There were meetings to schedule, meals to plan, and tasks around the estate that needed attention. But she was patient with him, guiding him every step of the way. There were moments when she would sit with him in the sitting room, telling him stories of her younger days, of how she had built her empire from the ground up, how she had faced loss and heartache with the same grace that now defined her. She spoke of love, too, how it had come to her in unexpected ways, both beautiful and painful. She spoke of her late husband, a man who had shared her dreams and ambitions, and how his passing had left a hollow space in her heart that had never fully healed. "You see, Samuel," she would say, "life is a series of moments, of people who come and go, and of the choices we make along the way. What matters most is not what we gain, but how we give." In those quiet moments, Samuel began to understand that the woman before him was not just an elderly philanthropist, but a person who had lived a full life, who had known both the highs and lows of human experience. Eleanor was more than a benefactor. She was a mentor, a guide. Over time, Samuel became more comfortable in his role. He learned how to manage the estate, assist with Eleanor's medical needs, and take care of the various responsibilities that came with the mansion. But it wasn't just about the practical aspects of his new life. It was about the bond he was forming with Eleanor, an unlikely friendship that began to feel more like family than employer and employee. One day, while preparing lunch in the grand kitchen, Samuel found himself thinking about his own family, the sacrifices his mother had made, the pain his sister Emily had endured. He had worked so hard to support them, to ensure their survival. But now, in this new life, he began to see things differently. Eleanor had given him more than just a job. She had given him the opportunity to build something meaningful, not just for himself, but for those he loved. The deeper he settled into this life, the more he realized that his kindness on the bus had led him here. He had been given a chance to live a life of purpose, a life of giving rather than just surviving. And it was in these moments, sitting across from Eleanor, working together on the estate, laughing over cups of tea, that Samuel began to understand the true power of compassion. But as with all things, time had a way of changing everything. Eleanor's health began to decline. It started subtly. She would become winded more easily, her steps slower, her voice weaker. At first, Samuel didn't want to acknowledge it. He had grown so fond of her, so grateful for her guidance, that the thought of losing her felt unbearable. But one afternoon, as he was sitting with her in the grand sitting room, he noticed it for the first time. Eleanor's breathing had become labored, her face flushed with a slight sheen of sweat. Samuel's heart raced as he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Eleanor," he asked, his voice laced with concern. She looked at him, a faint smile on her lips, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "It's nothing, Samuel," she said softly, but her voice trembled. "Just a little tired. You know how it is." But Samuel knew better. He could see it in her eyes, the signs of something deeper. Panic set in as he helped her stand, supporting her frail body as they made their way toward the phone. He dialed for an ambulance, his mind racing as he fought to keep his emotions in check. He didn't want to lose her, not like this. At the hospital, Samuel stayed by her side, his hand gripping hers as they rushed her into emergency care. He didn't care about the doctors or the machines. He cared only about her, about making sure she was okay. As the hours stretched on, Eleanor's condition worsened, her body growing weaker with each passing minute. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctors emerged from behind the heavy doors. The news was what Samuel had feared. Eleanor's time was running out. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice faint but steady as she looked up at him from the hospital bed. Her once vibrant eyes were now clouded with exhaustion, but they still held the same warmth, the same strength that had drawn him to her all those months ago. "Promise me," she said, her hand reaching out for his, "that you'll live your life fully. You've given me more than I could have ever asked for. Don't let this be the end of your journey." Tears welled in Samuel's eyes as he nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise, Eleanor, I'll live for both of us." And with that promise, Eleanor passed away peacefully, leaving Samuel with a deep, aching emptiness in his heart. But even in her final moments, she had given him the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that kindness, love, and selflessness could transcend the boundaries of time and space. The days that followed were a blur of grief and gratitude. Samuel found himself at the mansion once more, surrounded by the life that Eleanor had created. But now, it was his responsibility to carry her legacy forward. He didn't know how he would do it, or what the future would hold. But one thing was certain: Eleanor's lessons would guide him, just as they always had. And so, in the quiet solitude of the mansion, Samuel vowed to honor her memory, to live a life that would make her proud. He would give back to the world in the same way she had, through kindness, generosity, and compassion. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life. A chapter that would be filled with both triumphs and challenges, but one that would ultimately change the lives of many, just as Eleanor had changed his. It's strange, isn't it, how the ripple of a single act can echo throughout a life? How a choice, no matter how small, can change the course of everything that comes after? That's what Samuel realized as he stood in Eleanor's grand sitting room, staring out the windows at the sprawling grounds of the mansion. The weight of her absence was still fresh, but her presence, in a way, lingered in every corner of the house, in every piece of furniture, every flower arrangement. She had left more behind than just a home. She had left a legacy. The will, which Samuel had only read after Eleanor's passing, was both a shock and a gift. Eleanor had bequeathed him everything, her entire estate, the mansion, and her considerable wealth. But the true inheritance wasn't in the property or the money. It was in the lessons she had passed on to him, in the trust she had placed in him, and in the responsibility she had handed him. The wealth was a tool, one that Samuel knew he had to use wisely. The first thing Samuel did was take the time to mourn. He honored Eleanor's life in his own way, spending hours in the gardens she had meticulously cared for, reflecting on the profound bond they had shared. She had been more than a mentor. She had been a mother figure, a guide, and a friend. Her quiet strength had shown him that the value of a person wasn't measured by their wealth or status, but by their actions, by the way they treated others. But as he sat in the stillness of her home, he also knew that he couldn't let her legacy die with her. The foundation that Eleanor had built, one of philanthropy, compassion, and integrity, needed to continue. Samuel could feel her spirit urging him forward, just as she had done in life. He couldn't let the opportunity slip by, not when he had the resources and the knowledge to make a real difference. It wasn't long before Samuel established the Eleanor Bradford Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping underprivileged families, funding scholarships for students in need, and supporting community projects that fostered social change. Eleanor had always said that the true measure of success was not in how much one amassed, but in how much one gave back. Samuel took that to heart. He was determined to honor her memory by following her example, by using the wealth she had left him to create a legacy of his own. But even more profound than the foundation was the way Samuel began to live his life. The money, the mansion, the prestige, these things no longer seemed as important. What mattered most to Samuel was the impact he could have on others, the way he could use his resources to lift people up, to change lives the way his own had been changed. His own humble beginnings, his struggles, and sacrifices had given him a unique perspective. He understood the challenges faced by those who had nothing, and he wanted to be the one to give them a chance. With the foundation's help, Samuel was able to offer scholarships to local high school students who had the potential but not the means to attend college. He funded programs to help low-income families access health care, and he supported local organizations that provided food and shelter for the homeless. Samuel's vision for the future wasn't just about wealth. It was about creating a community where everyone had the opportunity to succeed, regardless of their background or circumstances. The foundation's work spread quickly. More people were impacted than Samuel could have ever imagined. His own life, once consumed with the struggle for survival, was now filled with purpose. He had found his calling, not in the luxuries that Eleanor had given him, but in the lives he could change. One afternoon, while walking through the park near his childhood home, Samuel saw an elderly woman struggling to carry her groceries. Without hesitation, he approached her, offering to help. As they walked together, Samuel couldn't help but think of Eleanor. The woman had taught him that the smallest act of kindness, when extended with genuine empathy, could change the world. "You know," Samuel said, as he carried her bags, "I used to think that kindness didn't matter, that we just had to survive. But then someone showed me how much it could change a life. I'm just passing it on." The woman looked up at him with a warm smile. "It's people like you that make the world better," she said. "We need more people like you." Those words stuck with him. Samuel realized that Eleanor's greatest lesson wasn't about the mansion or the wealth. It was about seeing the good in others, even when the world seemed bleak. It was about using one's power, no matter how small, to make life a little easier for someone else. In the years that followed, the foundation grew. Samuel worked tirelessly, but it never felt like work. Every day was an opportunity to make a difference, to continue the mission that Eleanor had started. Her lessons shaped every decision he made, every interaction he had. She had taught him that while life was fleeting, the impact we leave behind is eternal. As Samuel stood at the dedication ceremony for a new community center funded by the foundation, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The people who had once been invisible to him were now at the forefront of his mind. Their struggles were his struggles, their triumphs his triumphs. He had not only inherited Eleanor's wealth, he had inherited her wisdom, her compassion, and her ability to see potential in others. The work wasn't always easy. There were setbacks, challenges, and moments when he questioned whether he was doing enough. But Samuel had learned from Eleanor that it wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. It was about showing up day after day and doing the best you could with the resources at hand. And as the years passed, Samuel's life began to mirror the very lessons he had learned from Eleanor. His actions, his kindness, and his unwavering commitment to others became his legacy, a legacy that would far outlast the mansion, the foundation, and even the wealth that had once seemed so important. The true measure of a life well lived, he realized, wasn't in the things you could buy, but in the lives you touched, the hearts you changed, and the love you gave. In the end, Samuel's story was a testament to the power of kindness, the ripple effect of a single good deed, and the way that one person, armed with integrity and compassion, could change the world. And as he walked through the park again, helping another person in need, Samuel couldn't help but smile. He knew that Eleanor was watching. Somewhere out there, her legacy was alive and well, carried on in him and in the countless lives he had touched. He had honored her memory, not just through the foundation or the wealth, but by living a life that truly mattered, one filled with love, empathy, and the belief that even the smallest act of kindness could change the world. Thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey of compassion and transformation. Samuel's story reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that change lives forever. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Until next time, keep believing in the power of empathy and kindness. Together, we can make the world a better place.